I suppose in my youth I was a bit of an anarchist. I think that was kind of a naive way of looking at the world. Over time, obviously running a business, and you realise that you need laws and order, and things need to be organised in such a way that criminals effectively don't undermine the system to the detriment of everybody.
This is The Corruption Diaries Season 2. I'm Naomi Fowler.
Without a tax system, none of the public services get paid for.
Richard Allen agreed to share his story in this podcast in the hope that no one else has to go through what he did.
When rules come in relation to tax, they can't allow an imbalance that distorts competition.
And maybe, just maybe, HMRC, the UK Treasury, politicians might even be listening, learn from it and improve things. In our last episode of this Season 2, what can we learn from Richard's fight? Where is he at today? And why is the battle to apply sales tax fairly still so far from over? These days, Richard still runs everything from his shed.
I have this weird employment status where on the one hand I'm still working doing the tax campaigning, but I'm also still working in the music industry. I work on helping labels with reissues. I'm also currently managing a band project, so it's an odd mixture. The two things have very little in common. If I was to write a book on the subject, I would call it Tax Avoidance the Musical.
Richard's Channel Islands fight isn't over yet. In previous episodes, we spoke about how Richard set up RAVAS, Retailers Against VAT Abuse Schemes.
RAVAS started off as just me being really unhappy with the fact that I was being forced out of business by a tax loophole. But through that, ended up representing lots of people on more complex aspects of the whole online tax problem. After the court case, I just had to leave it for about a couple of years. I just got on with the rest of my life. But then, because I had a very good relationship with the National Audit Office, they came back to me again and they were saying, we're doing more work on this, would you help us?
The National Audit Office is the UK's independent public spending watchdog.
So I worked with them, and in the process of working with them, I said, look, I want to make a complaint about HMRC, and I explained what I'd been through.
They told him he could make a complaint about HMRC, the UK's tax authority, to the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, a public body that investigates complaints about UK government departments.
My complaint was that officials had misadvised ministers and had basically given false information to all kinds of people, and that if it hadn't been for me, the truth would never have come out. Now, I had no expectation this was going to get anywhere. It took 3 years, and they said that that's not for them to deal with. They said that's for Parliament. Well, I mean, how would Parliament know about any of this? I mean, Parliament had no idea what was going on.
In Richard's second campaign to stop a tax scam, 2 other people joined forces with him afterwards. HMRC wrote them cheques in recognition of their time and expertise helping them close a tax loophole. But they never offered Richard one.
I complained about the reward. How come I don't get rewarded when my colleagues do? They're unable to answer that as well, because they said that HMRC made a decision, but they're not allowed to tell me what it is. It's a secret.
Since then, the UK government has strengthened the rights of whistleblowers and now offers a reward to whistleblowers that lead them to the collection of at least £1.5 million in tax. Too late for Richard, though.
One thing that came out of my court hearing with HMRC, which is of great value, is I got to see all the paperwork. Before I sued HMRC, I had no idea what was going on their side of the fence. After I sued HMRC, I saw absolutely everything. All of this is about hiding the fact that people made mistakes and errors, because all the ministers I dealt with absolutely 100% wanted to deal with this problem. The problem was they couldn't deal with it because they were being given incorrect information, incorrect legal advice, and therefore they were never given the option to close it down. Stephen Timms, who was the Financial Secretary to the Treasury that I met in 2014, he absolutely confirmed to me that he wanted to stop the Channel Islands problem, but was told by officials it couldn't be prevented due to EU law. That was completely wrong.
Time and time again, Richard found that government advisors had no industry experience.
It became obvious to me that there must be a lot of things that happen that go wrong because the advice given to ministers is in fact incorrect, or flawed, or worse, deliberately misleading. And there is no oversight of any of this.
Richard successfully campaigned to end tax abuse on mail order goods sent via the Channel Islands using low-value consignment relief that exempted goods below a certain value from VAT or VAT or sales tax, while other sellers not using the Channel Islands dodge had to pay it. But now, in this age of supercharged internet retail, there are always new challenges that make the marketplace an unfair one. Now, Richard's identified a new area of sales tax exemptions abuse.
What's happening is you've got big online retailers and marketplaces abusing it again. It's an ongoing issue, and they're now looking at removing all exemptions. There will be none at all. I was asked by HMRC my views on this. What I said to them was, look, you've removed low-value consignment relief. Great. You're making online platforms collect VAT. That makes sense. You're asking overseas sellers to register VAT in the UK. That doesn't make sense, right? Because why will they do it? And I made that point to them. Finally, they've admitted that. There's a review going on at the moment because essentially that administrative relief threshold has been abused globally. This is a global problem.
As you can hear, Richard's campaigning work is not over. So what does Richard believe tax authorities should be doing to tackle the tax revenue losses and the unfair market that's created where the pace of change with online selling now seems to get faster and tax authorities and policymakers don't listen to small retailers like him on the front line?
I realise HMRC's got a very difficult job. They're constrained by cost. They are not always understanding what's happening with regards to retail and what's happening out there because things changing all the time, particularly with regards to technology, the internet. So it's not easy. There's a sort of very old school thinking that doesn't take into account technology, online retail, and the way online retail can rapidly adapt and change the way in which it operates. Our customs authorities are incapable of doing the same thing. Online retailers are changing their practices at the flick of a switch. Customs are winding a handle with a rope attached to it. And they need to think of a way of having a department that is able to react rapidly to these kinds of abuses if they have any hope of preventing them. The responsibilities within HMRC are split between so many different departments that there's no real focus on online. There needs to be an online tax unit that has people from within the industry that does what we did. People won't do things on a voluntary basis, particularly with regards to paying tax. So the only way to make these businesses pay the tax is to have a system whereby when goods enter the UK, tax is charged on them. The technology is already being used by online retailers to do incredible things. I'm sure everybody has ordered on their phone something from an online retailer and it goes, the item's just been put through your letterbox. Now, if you can be told on your phone that an item's just been posted through your letterbox, is it really that difficult to come up with a system where we collect tax on every package? I don't believe it is, and I don't think anyone's actually sat down and made the effort to try and deal with that. Always they go on about cost. Well, they said that about the Channel Islands. It will cost a lot of money to shut down the Channel Islands. Had the exact opposite effect. It saved huge amounts of money.
There's also the question of the need to limit the power of monopolies, the very biggest businesses, which will use their size and political influence to take advantage in every way they're allowed to.
When the internet first started, and I was there right at the beginning with online retail, it was trumpeted as the little guy can compete with the big guy. And it was like this wide open new country where you could compete fairly with everybody. There was a period where that happened, where all the search engines would only search something on the basis of its popularity, not how many clicks you'd paid for. That gradually got subverted by big businesses who realised that if they created their own version of the internet, they could control it. Big online marketplaces are like an ecosystem, and the really massive ones are more like a search engine. I mean, there are people out there who will use, a business like Amazon or eBay, just go click on there it is, buy. They realise quite rapidly, businesses, that if we control the ecosystem, we don't have the problem with competition. Would we tolerate a high street where every shop was the same shop and you had to rent a table in that shop in order to sell your stuff. We wouldn't tolerate that. Yet we tolerate that on the internet. In order to sell your goods, you have to go to the most dominant marketplace, or you don't stand a hope of anybody seeing it. And the reason that's happening is because we have not put in place the protections that are in place for traditional retail. And the test is, are you being forced to accept terms and conditions that you only accept because you've got no chance of selling your goods if you don't accept them? And these are the kinds of abuses that have come in that really haven't been addressed. There should be a completely different ecosystem within the tax authorities that is focused purely on ensuring that online retail is a fair environment.
As we know at the Tax Justice Network, this is a problem for the global economy, but it's not only an economic issue. As the biggest companies increase their market share and distort those markets through things like unfair tax advantages, they knock out the competition and gain an ever bigger influence over governments and government policy. And that undermines democracy itself. The more dominant big tech companies are allowed to become, the bigger their army of lawyers gets, and a tax authority becomes like David facing Goliath, but without even a sling in his hand. So that means what's needed is proper investment so they can ensure our tax systems are fair and that markets are functional. If there's abuse, they must have the resources to tackle it properly. But the amount governments invest in enforcement is pathetic. In the end, it's about political will.
You don't just go to government and say, I've got a great idea, let's do it. You know, it's weighed up on a sort of series of scales, and they will take a view from everybody approaching them. And based upon the responses they get, they will then look at the cost benefit, and they will then present that as a series of choices to the government based upon having gone through that process. Now, the problem with that process is they're only going to be able to make those decisions based upon the feedback they get. And it was obvious to me on the Channel Islands thing, they were getting feedback from the wrong people. When Ravis came along, we gave feedback from people that were being affected by it. And one of the failings, I would say, of government is the public do not engage enough with the government to make sure that they make their views clear. Quite often I'll say to people, have you ever spoken to your MP? It's all about changing the narrative. You know, if you don't change the narrative, you're stuck with the current one.
And what the story of Richard's fight shows too is that UK governments must stop turning a blind eye to corruption in the Channel Islands and pretending there's nothing they can do about it. On that, here's John Christensen, one of the founders of the Tax Justice Network.
Over the years, particularly during my years with Tax Justice Network, it became clear to me that successive UK governments, this was Labour and Conservative governments, were protecting the Channel Islands tax haven roles, even whilst they were saying publicly that they were keen to assist with a crackdown on tax havens. Behind the scenes, they were doing everything they could to block European Union, especially European Union, attempts to crack down on the Channel Islands' misuse as tax havens. I heard from many, many very senior officials, German officials, French officials, Dutch officials, and indeed American officials, that they had been told very misleadingly that the UK government would like to take action to block the Channel Islands' use as a tax havens, but didn't have the power to do that. And what I want to assert is that has always been a deceit. The UK government does have the power to intervene, could intervene tomorrow if it wished to, just chooses not to do so.
Richard Allen's story shows how much one person can achieve if they just dig their heels in and are prepared to fight. We need people like Richard. He started off trying to seek justice for his business, and he ended up a campaigner. He saved his country billions in tax, he created a fairer business environment, and those things lead to a better society for everyone.
There's fair and there's unfair. I've been brought up to distinguish between those things. You know, I'm not arrogant enough to say that I always am able to do so, but I think that certainly that you would hope that a court would be able to tell the difference between right and wrong. That's what a civilised society is, isn't it? Society that is able to distinguish between right and wrong.
You've been listening to The Corruption Diaries Season 2, a podcast from the Tax Justice Network. This series was recorded, produced and sound designed by Leo Schick and presented and executive produced by me, Naomi Fowler. Big thanks to Richard Allen for sharing his story with us. Delirium Records music used in this episode was courtesy of Cherry Red Records. If you liked a song, see the track listing in the episode notes.